Welcome back to my channel. In the previous episode, we saw the untimely death of a man and the difficult choice I was forced to make. Today, we will dive deeper into the impact of this incident on me and the other passengers. Who is hiding the true story? How will I confront the challenges that lie ahead? Let's continue this gripping journey together. Jonathan froze at my words. Why do you ask that? You just look so familiar to me. I smiled. If not, then forget I asked. No, I haven't. Do you have any relatives who have had surgery at our hospital? I pressed. He answered firmly, no. I yawned, pretending to be tired, wanting to take a quick nap. Just as Jonathan was leaving the room, I abruptly opened my eyes. Jonathan was lying. I was certain of it. When he said no, I noticed his pupils suddenly constrict, sweat appearing on his forehead, and his gaze involuntarily drifting elsewhere. But if he had any relatives I had operated on, why wouldn't he admit it? Why wouldn't he acknowledge if the surgery didn't go well? Given his temperament, he should have criticized my mistakes when we first met. If the surgery went well, then why did his eyes flash with hostility and scrutiny? There was something inexplicable about Jonathan. What had really happened during that surgery? What had the results been? I closed my eyes, trying hard to sift through the remnants of my memory for clues. Under the surgical lights, everything was crystal clear. The patient lay on the sterile operating table, already anesthetized. I wore surgical gloves and deftly made the incision along the marked spot. The kidneys should be located in the retroperitoneal area, beside the spine. There was no one on the operating table. I had no assistance. I retrieved the hemostatic clamp and arterial forceps myself, washing the membrane off the organ with saline as it flowed down. There was no bleeding, and the operation was progressing smoothly. The patient's vital signs on the monitor remained stable. The surgery was a success. I had removed the kidney, but the image flickered by, and I couldn't see the specifics of the kidney's condition. At a glance, the kidney seemed fine. No, I needed to look again. Replaying that moment in my mind. Was the condition of the kidney a miscalculation before the surgery? The kidney appeared to be in good condition, seemingly without issue. To be honest, I was beginning to doubt whether my memory had any distortions. If I hadn't deliberately tried to recall it, I wouldn't have remembered that surgery at all. I would have thought it was just a strange dream, leaving me with only fragmented memories. I stood by the operating table, skillfully performing the surgery. The day turned dark, and I was still working late. The patient in the surgical garb was calling for me, Dr. Mark, but I could barely make out their faces, nor could I recall what type of surgery I was performing. The next scene shifted, and the department head was awarding me a prize. He smiled as he put his arm around my shoulder, with others gathered around me. We posed for a photo to commemorate my receiving the ticket for the ideal train. My name was written on that ticket, and I was the only one in the whole hospital to receive it. I was ecstatic, dancing around. However, the next moment, I found myself on the train, with a man collapsing beside me, his breathing stopping as I frantically administered CPR. Regarding these memories that should have felt familiar, I could only summarize vaguely. I couldn't pinpoint the specific details. It was all so strange. Everything felt bizarre. I hadn't slept all night, and the mountains outside were stained red with maple leaves. Everywhere I looked, the red maples swayed in the wind, and the visual impact of that red brought back memories of blood splattering everywhere on the surgical table, right before my eyes. Today marked the 5th day, with only 3 days left until the train reached its destination. I swung my legs over the bed. Ryan was sitting in his seat, dozing off, dark circles under his eyes. As soon as I sat down, he woke up and smiled at me. Dr. Mark, did you sleep well today? You missed breakfast, but I saved some bread for you. I thanked him and asked how he hadn't rested well. He paused for a moment, clearly not expecting my question. I was up all night gaming and went to bed late, he said, pulling out his phone to show me. But I noticed a new, unfamiliar app in the corner of the screen. What's this? I asked, pointing at the app. He quickly shut his phone. That's a remote connection to my home security system. It lets me access the signal from Sanfan Island while I'm out. He offered a slight smile. I always thought you intended to leave and never come back, like me. Ryan's face turned pale, his cover blown. He hesitated for a long moment, his earlier sincerity disappearing, and he replied in a low tone, I forgot to delete it. I forgot. His excuse was decent, but that pause had said enough. I excused myself as usual, but as I turned, I dropped the phony smile I had been wearing. Everyone on this train had something off about them. Late last night, unable to sleep, I got up and wandered around. The dead man, the incessant questioning from Jessica, the fleeting feelings of loss, and those probing looks directed at me all felt inexplicable, yet difficult to understand. I drifted through the train's carriages like a ghost without a place to belong, completely lost, until I heard violent vomiting coming from one of the rooms. I recognized it as the room where Jonathan had been staying. Patients with late-stage pancreatic cancer often vomit frequently. I worried that he might choke, so I was about to push the door open when the vomiting suddenly stopped. What was happening inside was beyond my expectations. The door cracked open, and I caught a glimpse of a man helping Jonathan while clearing foreign objects from his mouth. I could tell he was quite skilled, either a healthcare worker or a doctor. Both of them had their backs to me, obscuring the man's face. "Mr. Blake, your condition doesn't allow you to take any more risks." Jonathan, lying on the bed, became slightly angry and pushed the man away. "I brought you on this trip to ensure a smooth journey, not to have you micromanaging me like this." The man kept his head bowed respectfully, enduring Jonathan's scolding. "Why did you remember only now?" the man argued, insisting there were no intervention devices on the train. Jonathan grew furious and accidentally knocked a cup to the ground, shattering it. The man's gaze followed the cup as it fell, and I quickly ducked behind the wall. "According to the current monitoring results on the phone, Mr. Blake, there's no need to worry. The journey can continue." I saw the man take out his phone from his pocket and hand it to Jonathan in that moment. I got a clear view of the man's face. It was the one that had haunted me all night. Indeed, the man who was so respectful to Jonathan was Ryan Fisher. On the first day of boarding the train, he had argued with Jonathan, but now he was acting as Jonathan's devoted subordinate, obediently following his commands. "If worst comes to worst, then we'll have to take extreme measures," Jonathan laughed. "After all, it's the same whether sitting now or after the journey ends. He's the only one they're talking about, besides me, right?" What did I remember? This thought displeased Jonathan. Shouldn't I have remembered? What did my memory and perception have to do with this journey? What exactly were these two people, who pretended not to know each other in front of me, planning? What did they mean by extreme measures? Were they planning to kill me? I couldn't piece everything together, but I sensed that I was in a precarious situation. There must be some critical detail I had forgotten. The only operation I kept questioning Jonathan about was the one involving that man who looked so much like him. His reaction told me that it indeed had taken place. In the operating room, I was alone. I had removed the kidney from the man who resembled Jonathan Blake. The kidney was intact, soft, plump, and a bright red color. Could it be that I had performed an unnecessary surgery due to a misjudgment? But if that was the case, why hadn't I shown any hesitation afterward? It was as if I had anticipated this all along, putting the kidney into a low-temperature preservation box without a second thought. Alone on the operating table, I saw a solitary patient pleading desperately. I was not performing a treatment surgery on the younger Jonathan, but rather extracting his kidney to store it away. The train had stopped moving, and I saw my pale reflection in the glass, suddenly uncertain of whom I really was. My memories began to clarify. I had indeed performed many surgeries, but some were undoubtedly unsavory. For reasons unknown, I had forgotten all of them. Clearly, Jonathan was seeking revenge for that younger Jonathan. I had taken his kidney, and Jonathan would not let me off the hook. There were only a few days left in this journey. Since they were scheming to ensure the trip went smoothly, there must be something waiting for me at the end. The extreme measures they spoke of were undoubtedly not good. I could not sit idly by. I needed to escape. I tried to discuss the possibility of getting off the train with the attendant, but she firmly told me, "The ideal train does not stop mid-journey." I couldn't wait for the journey to end. Jonathan had power and influence. He wanted revenge, and I couldn't manage to act alone. No matter what, I had to leave this conspiracy-laden train ahead of time. Then I thought of another issue. Emily was still on the train. I hadn't found her, and I couldn't leave her behind. One person would find it unbearable on the train. I could only write coded messages in each carriage, letting her know I was waiting for her response. This was our secret communication from university days that no one else could understand. Besides that, all I could do was be more cautious, especially regarding food and water. During communal meals, I couldn't take 2 days' worth of food or follow unfamiliar people to the counter. I mostly stayed in my room, afraid to go out, except for routine head counts and ticket verifications. Even when Jessica knocked to ask about me, I remained silent. As for Ryan, there was no need to mention him. I had resolved that from now on, no matter what happened during this journey or what anyone said, I wouldn't listen or trust them anymore. I locked myself in the room, obsessively recalling past events. The pleas I had heard became clearer, and the faces slowly came into focus. My name is Dr. Mark Sullivan, an emergency surgeon at the largest hospital on San Fan Island. But at the same time, I was a hidden executioner. I harvested corneas, kidneys, and other organs from various people and sold them through illegal means at high prices for transplant surgeries. The donors were not voluntary. Their desperate cries before anesthesia echoed in my mind, not begging me to save them, but pleading for me to let them go. In various scenes, I saw a man in a white coat assisting me in administering anesthesia to the organ donors, but I could never remember the specifics. Yet, working at the largest hospital on San Fan Island, I actually didn't have to work hard to support myself. So why did I take such risks and engage in these activities? The cries and pleas in my head grew louder. I became increasingly paranoid, feeling like eyes were watching me, waiting for me to receive my comeuppance, even in the confines of my room. I needed to escape. Of course, I needed to escape. Once Emily appeared, I would get out. It was as if I heard that hope deep within me. On the day before the journey was about to end, Emily appeared. I pulled her into the room, too hurried to explain anything, and quickly told her my escape plan. "Mark, you're too anxious. Just relax a bit." "I can't relax. There are eyes watching me." They had sent Jonathan to monitor my movements. The window by my bed was covered tightly with layers of newspaper, making the entire room dark. Only in this darkness could I feel a flicker of long-lost safety. I grabbed Emily's hand and said, "The ideal train is a carefully orchestrated conspiracy. There is no outside world. Everything is part of Jonathan's design. This is a plot for revenge against me, and we must escape." "I'm willing to leave with you," Emily said, her decision providing me a small sense of comfort, easing my tension just a bit. But the next moment, she reached to pull back the newspapers I had placed over the window. I quickly stopped her. "No, Mark, don't be afraid," she reassured me as sunlight streamed through the window, breaking through the small gap. "I just want to see if it's day or night." Outside, it was bright. The dusk light fell softly, and snowflakes were swirling down, blanketing everything in a vast white. It rarely snowed on San Fan Island. I remembered the only significant snowfall during my time in college with Emily. After that night, the ground had been covered with a thick layer of snow. When I stepped in, it reached nearly to my calves. Emily pulled me to run across the campus, building snowmen and having snowball fights. Her nose turned bright red from the cold, just like a snowman's carrot nose. But all she did was laugh, her laughter filled with warmth. Those memories seemed etched into my soul, deeply imprinted in my mind. She gazed out the window, and I could see she was recalling something, her eyes reflecting the same emotions and longing as mine. "I've always had a question," I said as I sat across from her, voicing the doubt that had lingered in my heart. "What exactly did we break up over?" It sounded ridiculous. She was the woman I loved deeply, yet I couldn't recall the reason for our separation. Emily lowered her head and remained silent for a long time before finally saying, "My father disapproved." I had met Emily's father. He was a retired professor, stern and rigid. He always seemed to speak harshly to me, believing I came from a low background and wouldn't achieve much in the future, which is why he was reluctant to trust Emily to me. I smiled faintly, feeling relieved to finally understand. After we left San Fan Island for good, there would be no one to stop us. We could return to those happy moments in the past, just the two of us. "Emily, you know, right?" "Yes, I love you very much." I paused, and my smile faded. "I truly love you, truly." The dim lights in the carriage flickered as night fell. I tightened the strings of my bag, took a few belongings, and stepped out of carriage 3 toward the nearest carriage door. At the end of carriage 3, I would have to pass through a crowded room to get there. So my plan was to move forward to the door of carriage 1. But as soon as I exited the room, Emily halted. "No, wait." She seemed to suddenly remember something. "I left something important in carriage 6. I need to go get it." I was taken aback, sensing something was off but still struggling to believe her. I couldn't afford to miss this opportunity. "That item is very important to me. I must retrieve it." Emily insisted firmly before running off toward carriage 6. I had no choice but to follow her, but just a few steps in, Jonathan's door swung open. To ensure Emily could escape, I positioned myself at the carriage's connection. Ryan stepped out from Jonathan's room, approaching me slowly, and the footsteps behind him filled me with unease. I relaxed slightly and stepped back into carriage 4. The narrow aisle made it clear I had no room to dodge if things turned violent. He was taller and bulkier than I was. "Dr. Mark, it's been several days since we last met," he said with a false, saccharine smile, moving closer. "I was worried something might have happened to you." "You should be worrying about Mr. Blake," I shouted, then pulled the concealed scalpel from my pocket and lunged at him. Ryan didn't fall for it. Instead, he swiftly caught my wrist, and we engaged in a struggle. I had been stabbed. Blood slowly seeped from my abdomen as I knelt down to the ground. Ryan seemed reluctant to let me die. He crouched down to check my condition. Upon seeing the severity of my bleeding, he began to take off his jacket to apply pressure. Taking advantage of his distraction, I suddenly plunged the scalpel into his back. He let out a horrifying scream, and I hurriedly fled toward carriage 6. I stumbled toward carriage 6, leaving a trail of blood behind me. I could hear footsteps chasing behind. It might have been Ryan pursuing me, or perhaps his scream had attracted others, but I couldn't afford to think about that now. I had to hurry, faster than ever. Emily was waiting for me. I needed to get Emily off this damn train. Finally, I reached her. In that moment, she looked just like she did when we first met, sitting by the dining table with her chin resting on her hand. Even now, covered in blood, she remained calm and unmoved. Her skin was as pale as snow, piercing my heart. Those warm memories flooded back. She had once worn white like this, but now she lacked that carefree smile, replaced by a sorrow I had never seen before. "It's okay. As long as we get out, that's what matters. If we could just escape, I could help her regain that joyful smile." I took her hand, and she didn't resist, allowing me to pull her along. I struggled to turn the handle of the locking mechanism, but my blood-soaked hands made it slippery, causing me to fail several times. My consciousness began to blur, and the footsteps behind us drew closer, just half a carriage away. I couldn't collapse here. I bit my tongue to stay awake. I summoned my last bit of strength and finally twisted the handle. The door of the train slowly creaked open, but outside, there was nothing at all. No snow falling, no vast earth covered in white, no pitch-black night, no endless tracks. Only a massive screen blocking out the sky, flickering with holographic projections. I glanced back and saw Ryan had caught up, charging toward me with a stick in hand. Without hesitation, I swung the weapon I had. "Emily," I shouted. "This train is a lie. The man lying on the ground is a lie. The pregnant woman asking about her husband is also a lie. Everything is a deception." The holographic screen displayed a large auditorium filled with people, the camera sweeping across familiar and unfamiliar faces. They were the passengers of this ideal train and the attendants, as if they had just witnessed an exhilarating performance and were still buzzing with excitement. The screen focused on the face of the man who had initially collapsed at my feet. Every pane of glass in the train reflected his visage, that face which had caused me guilt and turmoil, which I had ultimately callously decided to forget. The man who should have been dead stood up and bowed for the audience, receiving thunderous applause. Sitting beside him was Jessica, the pregnant woman who had incessantly questioned me about her husband. Her face now radiated joy, waving as if she had just won an Oscar for Best Actress. Yet I remained trapped on the train, as if crucified. The dim light fell on my face, and my panic couldn't escape their watchful eyes. My terror turned into something absurd in their eyes, and mocking laughter erupted around me as they applauded, chanting my name. "Mark Sullivan, Emily Parker." Due to unforeseen circumstances, the Ideal Train's performance has been forced to conclude early. We thank our investor, Mr. Jonathan Blake, for inviting us to participate and for watching such a fantastic show. The attendant's voice echoed through the train speakers. As the holographic screen dimmed, the surroundings plunged into eerie darkness. Then the screen lit up again, revealing a vast expanse of falling snow, and the lights in the carriage also brightened. In that moment, Jonathan sat in a wheelchair, connected to a massive respirator, an oxygen mask tightly fitted over his mouth and nose. "Dr. Sullivan," Jonathan gasped, struggling to breathe as he called out to me. Ryan stood beside him, injured, yet still acted like the loyal subordinate he was. Supporting Ryan was none other than my ex-girlfriend, the woman I had loved most in my life, Emily. My abdominal wound had been treated and the bleeding stopped. While the injury wasn't fatal, I felt more unwell than ever, as I had recalled everything. My name is Mark Sullivan, born into an ordinary family on San Fan Island. San Fan is an island surrounded by sea on all sides, isolated from the outside world. Yet it is not backward. On the contrary, the land is fertile and rich in resources. However, these resources are controlled by a select few, creating a significant wealth gap on the island. Unfortunately, I found myself at the bottom of San Fan's social hierarchy. I fell in love with Emily, who worked hard to get into medical school and became my beloved girlfriend. We loved each other deeply, and she couldn't wait to commit to me. "Let's get married after graduation," she said one summer night, stopping in her tracks with a blush on her face. A breeze blew, causing strands of her hair to fall. She gently tucked them away, revealing her petite ears. But I remembered her father, the stern man who always spoke harshly to me. I thought that if I could earn enough money, I would consider marriage, so I rejected her proposal. I regretted that decision deeply in the days that followed. After graduation, I worked tirelessly, pulling late shifts, yet I still hadn't made enough money to impress her father. Until one of my junior colleagues, who specialized in neurology, proposed a scheme for live organ transplants. He would handle finding matching organs, contacting buyers for the transplants, and performing the surgeries. All I had to do was extract the organs. He even offered to split the profits 80 to 20, clearly doing more work than I would, yet willing to let me take the larger cut. "Senior, I know you need money urgently. This is the best deal I can offer you," he said. I struggled internally and initially refused. But soon, Emily's father informed me that he wanted to marry her off to someone else, a fellow doctor who had a better background and family wealth, and he was determined to take the woman I loved. Whether it was driven by profit or love's madness, I agreed to the arrangement, and once I started, there was no stopping. Jonathan's son was the kidney I had extracted. So I looked at Jonathan and saw that pale smile on his face. Was it for revenge or venting his frustrations? "This is an experiment," Jonathan said calmly. "I erased your memories and replaced them with a fabricated past, all to make you believe in the existence of the ideal train and to test your humanity. If you reveal the truth about the man's death, I will stop my revenge and let you go." From the very beginning, they had been testing me. Every time the crowd turned to look at me, they were waiting for my decision. Ironically, I had once wondered why they chose me to make this choice. I had to speak the truth. Initially for my own benefit, just as I had wanted to earn enough money. Subconsciously, I was desperate to escape San Fan Island and my original class. Later, with the appearance of Jessica, I faltered but delayed and abandoned the idea due to a sense of luck. Then, when I finally gathered the courage to be honest, Emily had died. I only wanted to maintain the perfect image in her eyes and to reconcile with her. I couldn't care less about that dead man. Emily was the one I would never give up on. "Dr. Sullivan," Jonathan gasped, struggling to speak, while Ryan stood behind him like a loyal subordinate. Supporting Ryan was none other than my ex-girlfriend, the woman I had loved most in my life, Emily. My abdominal injury had been treated, and the bleeding had stopped. While the wound wasn't fatal, I felt more tormented than dead, as I had recalled everything. My name is Mark Sullivan, born into an ordinary family on San Fan Island. The island is surrounded by the sea, isolated, with fertile land and rich resources. Yet these resources are held by a select few, creating a significant wealth gap, while I unfortunately became the bottom of the food chain. Emily and I loved each other deeply. Through hard work, she got into medical school and looked forward to spending her life with me. "Let's get married after graduation," she said one summer evening, a shy blush on her cheeks as the gentle breeze played with her hair. But I remembered her father, the man who always spoke coldly to me. I thought that if I earned enough money first, I could consider marriage, so I rejected her proposal. I regretted that decision immensely afterward. After graduating, I worked tirelessly, pulling late shifts, yet I still didn't earn enough to impress her father. It was then that a junior colleague specializing in neurology approached me with a proposal for live organ transplants. He would handle finding matching organs, contacting buyers, and performing the transplants, while I would only be responsible for the extraction of the organs. He even offered an 80 to 20 split. Even though he had more responsibilities, he was willing to let me take the larger share. "Senior, I know you need money urgently. This is the best deal I can offer," he said. I struggled internally and initially refused. But then Emily's father told me he planned to marry her off to someone else, a fellow doctor who came from a better background and wealthier family. Driven by profit or madly in love, I eventually agreed to this arrangement, and once I started, I couldn't stop. The kidney I extracted belonged to Jonathan's son, which made me look at Jonathan now, seeing the pale smile on his face intertwined with anger and confusion. "This is an experiment," Jonathan said blandly. "I erased your memories and implanted a fabricated past to make you believe in the existence of the ideal train, testing your humanity. If you reveal the truth about the man's death, I will end my revenge and let you go." From the start, they had been testing me. Whenever the crowd cast their gaze toward me, they were waiting for my decision. Ironically, I found myself confused as to why I was the one expected to make this choice. I could only speak the truth. Initially, it was for my own benefit, just as I wanted to earn enough money. Subconsciously, I was desperate to escape Sanfan Island and the class I belonged to. Later, Jessica's appearance made me waver, but I delayed and ultimately gave up out of sheer luck. When I finally gathered the courage to speak up, Emily was gone. I only wanted to maintain the perfect image in her eyes and reconcile with her. I couldn't care less about that dead man. Emily was someone I would never give up on. People will only think I deserve this. No one will stand up to accuse him and force me into this experiment. Jonathan looked uneasy, gripping the steering wheel, his eyes darting around. I thought to myself, how could I have guessed all of this? It wasn't that I had remembered. It was just that recalling the junior doctor's involvement in the organ trafficking felt increasingly muddled in my mind. Ryan wanted to erase his guilt, placing infinite permanent memory erasure points here. Unfortunately, memory is never just a fragment or a scene. It's a series of continuous events, lasting months or even years. He didn't have the ability to erase everything. So in many scenes, he had just erased his own face, thinking that would enable him to escape unnoticed. It was precisely because he only erased that one face that made me suspicious. At that moment, I regained some strength, laughing uncontrollably, and as I bent down, I grasped the scalpel blade hidden in the blood. The red light turns green. Ryan's brows furrowed. From that moment on, he had no desire to speak, while I began to chatter away, trying to shift the focus. "Does Emily know about your scheming? You, the one who sent those helpless people to my surgical table, can stroll around freely," I said with a cold laugh. Ryan showed no reaction to my words. During this time, I cut the tip of my finger, the pain gradually pulling me back from the fog. My hand slowly regained its strength. Suddenly, the phone Ryan had placed in the empty space lit up for a moment. I saw a contact named Sue flashing on the dialing interface. I quickly lunged for the phone, and Ryan reacted just as fast, both of us struggling for control. "I need to tell Emily the whole truth," I roared. "You hypocritical scoundrel. She won't believe you. I've been with her long enough. As long as I explain everything clearly, she will definitely trust me." Ryan completely lost control. The phone slipped from his hand and flew out the window with a deafening crash. Until then, his face had been as dark as a demon's. "His father was left without a heart by you. How could he trust you?" I challenged. "That's impossible," Ryan shot back angrily. "If that were true, how do you explain Emily standing by Jonathan's side? I know she has never been able to sever her ties with her father. Although Emily's father didn't approve of me, often insulting or humiliating me, she had always loved him dearly." "You're lying." I worked my fingers to the bone, risking my life, trading organs to earn his recognition. How could I kill him? If I did, wouldn't that push Emily into the abyss? How could I ever harm Emily? I protested, grappling with Ryan as the car sped along the mountain road. I pressed the scalpel against his throat, forcing him to comply. "Tell me the truth. I'm driving." Ryan gripped the steering wheel, afraid to move even slightly. I didn't relent, pushing the blade in further until it broke the skin, and rich red blood began to trickle down his neck. The mountain road was winding, but once we got past this point, we would reach our destination, the hospital. To attract attention, Ryan constantly honked the horn. My nerves were frayed, and in a moment of desperation, I stabbed at his leg, twisting the knife. Almost instantly, Ryan slammed on the brakes and pulled the car to the side of the road. "Mark, are you insane?" "Yes, I've lost my mind. Do you want to feel another stab?" I said, thrusting the blade closer to him. "I'm framing you. I've drugged you and induced anesthesia. You didn't do it, he quickly clarified. You said the target was Emily, and you withdrew partway. So after you left the operating room, I pushed her father back onto the table. Ryan was sweating profusely, and to convince Emily that I was responsible for her father's heart being removed, I had shown her the footage from the operating room. That's why Emily had believed all along that I had killed her father. Because she witnessed it herself, she must be utterly disappointed in me, or rather, she should loathe me. Ryan was losing too much blood, his face turning pale as the car parked halfway up the mountain road. He pleaded with me to take him to the hospital, promising to let me go, even mentioning Emily's name, saying as long as I saved him, he would clarify the truth for me. His breaths were growing weaker. I jumped out of the car and moved him to the passenger seat. Doctors heal, it's our duty. I settled in the driver's seat and restarted the engine. Just as Ryan was about to relax, I didn't let off the gas or brakes, and the engine roared loudly. Neither of us deserves to be a doctor. We don't deserve to live. My existence will only make Emily taste despair and pain time and again. In Ryan's shocked gaze, I released the brake, and the car barreled off the guardrail, hurtling toward the cliff on the mountain road. Emily's face appeared in my mind again, her white dress billowing, her smile like a flower beside me. Even as I fell deeper into the mire, I still wanted to look up at that pure white. I didn't know how to protect you, nor how to stop loving you. Perhaps this was the end. Let the story conclude, and everyone should feel free to discuss it.